Hey everybody, I'm Christian Johnson. Welcome to the ShadowBox Podcast. Today on the podcast, it's actually our very first episode. So we have Izzy. Izzy and I met on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is of course a great place to just be able to meet people from your industry or any industry in the world. And you can meet literally the top people in that field. And reached out. I think I reached out, you reached out, whatever it was, but we made that connection. And literally you're the first person, I asked, to be on this podcast. You created a really amazing company. We're gonna dig into that. But first, Izzy, I'd love for you just to introduce yourself, and let's just dig in. This is gonna be just a really great casual conversation. Honestly, I may do very little editing on this. And I just feel like we have a great energy. So, Izzy, how are you doing today? Please introduce yourself.
Brother, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, first and foremost, thank you for this really amazing opportunity for me personally. I didn't know I was the first, but I'm even more humbled. I was humbled that you asked, and then I'm more humbled to be the first to come on to this podcast. Like you said, we met on LinkedIn. I just want to reinforce that LinkedIn is like the great connector of people. Just to echo what you were saying, the power and the reach that it has is I only am just figuring out its full potential, but the fact that it brought the two of us together is nothing short of amazing, and I'm grateful for that. And however we connected, whether it was you first or me first, but in terms of me personally, I am a recent transplant to Texas. I live in San Antonio, formerly living in New York City. Lived there my whole life. Spent a few years abroad. I did some volunteer military service in the IDF, Israeli Defense Force. And in February of 2022, I started a new company. The company is called Fox 2 Sierra.
Mhm.
It is we like to say, a full service security consulting firm. The origin story of that is a story in and of itself, but to sort of condense it, it's the company and the evolution and the growth of that company that brought me to Texas. I was going back and forth for all of 2023, and independently of that, I think my time in New York had sort of come to an end. Was looking for change and opportunity through the company and what we were doing, and potential clients and customers brought me to Texas. And I moved here in December 2023, and it's been amazing ever since.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about before. You kind of started off, actually as a lawyer, right? And
Correct.
then
Yep.
and then going from lawyer to actually join the IDF. Let's dig into that a little bit. Can you just tell me just a little bit about, of course, like what you were doing as far as, being a lawyer, and then like what made that even happen?
Sure. Um, so the chronology of it was I did the IDF first. So
Okay, okay.
I joined the IDF as a volunteer when I was 17 years old. So I was really young. Um, I had never been outside of the United States other than Niagara Falls. Like, that's
Mhm.
my international travel. Um, I grew up on the stories of my grandfather, my dad's dad, who was a soldier in the British Army in World War II, fought throughout Europe, North Africa, uh, eventually made his way to Palestine, which was then under British rule. And, as a kid, we didn't have cell phones. There was no internet back then. All we had were books, television, and the stories told to us by family members. So I would spend weekends with my grandfather, who lived, up the road from my parents, and I just relished those stories. So I think he imbued in me early on a sense of um, admiration and respect for the military. I never thought of myself as someone that would go into the military per se. But life has a very interesting way of putting twists and turns in your road. Anyway, I joined the IDF. I served for a little less than 3 years. Nothing spectacular. It was pre-GWOT, pre the global war on terrorism, pre 9/11. But it did make me grow up. It did give me a sense of camaraderie, purpose, and when I finished my service, I came back and I went straight into law school. So you asked me about the law. I like to tell people today that I'm a recovering attorney.
Okay.
I was a litigator for 25 years. I got a job as a prosecutor straight out of law school. For me, I never wanted to go big law. I never wanted to do pencil pushing, paper shuffling. That wasn't my thing. I needed to get into the courtroom as quickly as possible. I wanted to litigate. That was my passion, and that was my focus. So it was never about money. It was really, I think, continuing the service. So like, if there's a takeaway, one of many takeaways from the military is sense of service, right? Of giving, putting people before yourself, duty, honor, country. So that was already in me. And when I went to law school, that was in me, and my focus was on continuing that journey. To be honest, I had a brother-in-law at the time that graduated a year behind me, also became a lawyer, and I distinctly remember, he got a very prestigious job in a prestigious law firm, and his year-end bonus was my annual salary as a public servant, as a prosecutor. So, but it didn't affect me. I wasn't in it for the money. And I was a prosecutor for 8 years in New York City, saw amazing things, got to try a lot of cases. My trajectory as a prosecutor was when I sort of felt like I had maxed out my time in the prosecutor's office. And by maxed out the time, I don't mean that I got tired of it. It was, I had accomplished the goals within the office that I wanted to accomplish. I had rotated through the bureaus that I wanted to go to. I had tried the cases I wanted to try. I had basically checked the boxes that I had set for myself. And I was still young and energetic and had that type A personality. And I wanted new challenges. And I was like, what can I do? So I pursued 2 avenues. I pursued the FBI, and I pursued the Marine JAG Corps. And throughout that process, which was a very lengthy one, the Bureau sent an application to them, did not hear from them right away. So there was a big gap in time from the time that I sent an application until that first letter. And back then, everything came via snail mail. There was no emails. You got, it's funny, we're talking about this now. But I got all my letters from the Department of Justice.
That's amazing.
So I got them all here while we're talking. And that was an 18-month process. So simultaneously with that, I was hedging my bets, essentially. And I was also looking into the Marine Corps JAG. I had a recruiter there, Captain Frank Diorio. I have no idea where this dude is today. And, a guy like me coming in, I remember taking the ASVAB, and I'm there with high school students. I'm married. I have kids. I'm a prosecutor for, it was at least 3-4 years at that point. And so it was like a really big contrast. And I'm training with these kids on the weekend, running and doing the PT and whatnot. Then 9/11 happens, and I was in the office on 9/11, and our building, the prosecutor's office in Brooklyn, New York, was on the east side of the East River. We had unobstructed views of the Twin Towers. I would get into the office quite early. That was my routine. And I remember hearing on the radio that a small aircraft had hit one of the towers, and I honestly thought it was a joke. So I was training new prosecutors, and I had the conference room reserved, and I went into the conference room that had almost floor-to-ceiling windows with an unobstructed view of Manhattan, and I figured, all right, I'll go in there. If something happened, I'll be able to see it from there. September 11th was a beautiful sunny day, almost a cloudless sky. And I remember getting to that window, and it didn't register in my head, but I remember when I got to that window was the time that I watched the second plane hit the second tower. Wow. So I saw the second plane hit the second tower. I distinctly remember the fireball and exactly, the images are forever etched in my mind. Mm-hmm. I knew instantaneously that this was attack when I saw it. That's how I felt. I remember running back to my office. I remember getting on the horn, calling my then wife, telling her to go to school, pick up my kids, go to the grocery store, get water, get some food, go to the bank, take out money, go home, wait for me. And then I called my mom, and I did the same thing. And I said, call my siblings and whatnot. And nobody understood. They're like, what's going on? Our building that the district attorney's office was housed in also had other governmental agencies. The Secret Service was in that building, some other federal agencies. It didn't take long before the PA system in the building would go off, and it was like everybody has to evacuate the building. Wow. And I was going to stay in my office and continue to make my phone calls. When at some point, the Twin Towers had antenna arrays on the roof of the building. Mm-hmm. At some point, cellular service went out, if memory serves me correctly. Mm-hmm. And then they literally sent agents around office to office within our building, mm-hmm. and physically had people removed from the office because I stayed behind. Wow. I remember I left the building, and right outside our building was a stairwell that went down into the subway system. Mm-hmm. And it was a double stairwell. So there was a landing and then another stairwell down to the subway. On the landing was a defunct barbershop, and they had sort of soaped up the windows, if you will, so you couldn't see in. Mm-hmm. And the NYPD had commandeered that location and turned it into a covert office for the Transit Bureau Vandal Squad, so TBVS. Mm-hmm. And I had worked the case with them. So occasionally I'd go lunchtime and hang out in there. Yeah. I had a good buddy of mine, Timmy Quinn, if he ever listens to this, nod to Timmy. I remember going into that office because I'm like, where else am I going to go? Mm-hmm. And when I went in there, it was chaos. They had a safe on the floor that was opened. They had duffel bags on the tables. They were taking out 50 rounds of ammunition, boxes of 9mm, and throwing them into these bags. They had a bank of a charging station on the wall for the batteries for their radios, and they were just pulling batteries out of this. I'm getting chills. Throwing it into the bag. Hard hats, because they were in the subway. They were required to have hard hats. Yeah. And Timmy, I was in a suit. I had my leather attaché case, and Timmy came and gave me a hug. And he handed me 50 rounds of police issue, 147 grain hydroshock ammo, hollow points. And he says, I don't know if I'll ever see you again. He goes, take this, and take out as many of them as you can. I mean, people did not know, honestly, what was going on. Yeah. I still have those 50 rounds to this day. Wow. I have a hard hat. I ran from there and went to the Brooklyn Promenade, which was the furthest point you can get on the East River side, and I watched the towers come down. Wow. And it was surreal. So I say all of this because I'm going through the process, the pipeline of trying to become an FBI agent or a Marine. Like I said, I was married at the time. I had little kids. Mm-hmm. The Marines, for the military listeners, every man's a rifleman. It really doesn't make a difference what your MOS is. Yeah. At the end of the day, if the country goes into a state of war, you're going where they need you. So the fact that I was trying to become a JAG officer became sort of moot. And similarly with the FBI, I was trying to go counterterrorism. I really wanted to go overseas. That got derailed because of my prior Israeli service and my time in country after 9/11. For one reason or another, that made me somewhat of a security risk, at least from their assessment. I had to go through a very rigorous additional background check as a result of that, which I ultimately prevailed in. But having had the waters muddied, if you will, It soured the taste in my mouth, and I was genuinely fearful. Like, if God forbid something happened, this would forever be in my file. Could I potentially become a scapegoat? So I never actually became a special agent, and I backed out of the JAG Corps pipeline. And I ended up taking a job in the private sector in a security company for about 15 months, and transitioned from there out back into the law. Ran a very successful litigation firm doing criminal defense work. Got some pretty high-profile cases. Again, nothing necessarily to do with me. It's criminal law. The cases are inherently notorious, or have the potential to be notorious. And I had a really good ride up until COVID. COVID hits, and it shuts everything down. New York, more so than many states. When COVID first started, people were afraid to step outside their doorsteps. They thought they'd drop dead. It was like the movies, honestly. I had a lot of time on my hands, and I had to figure out what I was going to do, because I was a solo practitioner. Litigation was my bread and butter. Without courts being open, without cases being called, people weren't getting arrested. I had no job. I had no income. So I had to pivot, lateral, figure out what I was going to do. And again, it went back to a sense of community and duty. I started to deliver meals for the elderly who couldn't go shopping for themselves. When you do it for one, they tell their friend, and then it's like, can you do my friend a favor? And it sort of metastasizes, and you're doing a few people favors, and word got around. It brought me into a house of worship. They're like, who's this dude? He's delivering meals. It's noble. It got me connected with some people in a house of worship. They got my background and pedigree, and they were like, hey, do you mind helping us out as well? I was like, what do you need? And they're like, well, we're looking to get a security grant from the federal government to do security for a synagogue. And I had no idea what that actually entailed or what that meant. But having a lot of time on my hands, I said, sure, I'll help. And I immersed myself in the nonprofit security grant program that is funded by the Department of Homeland Security and overseen by FEMA. So I did a deep dive down that rabbit hole. I saw all the opportunity and how much money the government was earmarking for nonprofits. So churches, synagogues, community centers, private schools, that were at a heightened risk level for any sort of attack or violence, as long as it fell under the guidelines and the purview of the nonprofit security grant program. You were eligible for up to $150,000 annually for approved security countermeasures. And it could be target hardening, it could be ballistic doors, windows, alarm systems, camera systems, bollards. But what I saw, the niche for myself, was training. I went through the list of things that are approved by this government grant, and I saw training amongst them. And I'm like, look, I'm not a contractor. I don't have access to any of this other material, but my background being what it is, I can certainly tap into my network, and I can provide, security training. And that's how it started. It started as a training company. And I utilized my connection with this particular house of worship. They were successful in obtaining the grant. I successfully wrote and petitioned for a 2-day active shooter response training for unarmed civilians. So basically putting a small team together, security team, to do, greetings, profiling, active shooter response. It was mostly medical in nature, tactical combat casualty care, TCCC, tourniquet, stop the bleed. And I sourced. So another important thing about me and about what I was trying to accomplish was giving back. So as someone who did not serve in the United States and ultimately didn't get a job as a law enforcement officer, as a prosecutor, I was considered law enforcement, but I wasn't working cases in a beat, carrying a weapon. I wanted to give back. I thought that, with 20 years of the GWAT, soldiers needed something to come home to. They needed a sense of purpose. They had bled for this country, sacrificed for this country, and I wanted to do something that was helpful to the country and helped, veterans and, former law enforcement that were looking for something to do. And I thought this would be an easier transition, not easy, but something that can perpetuate what they've been doing as part of the machine, as part of the military. We can tap into those skills and utilize them in the way that they've been trained to do and give them a sense of purpose. So I was super fortunate. So again, we talk about how you and I connected over LinkedIn. I went to social media and I found an Air Force pararescue jumper, PJ, tier 1 operator, awesome guy, Dominic Luke out of Covington, Louisiana, a consummate badass, but a humble dude. And he ran my first TCCC course. And you and I discussed offline, trying to get regular everyday people to train who are not immersed in a job or an environment where training would seem normal is like, at the time, it was a daunting, impossible task. I couldn't get people to sign up for this 2-day training that was paid for, meaning they didn't have to pay for it. They just had to show up. And I tried to bribe people with breakfast, bagels and a spread and coffee and whatnot. And I got 8 people that I really had to twist their arms to get there. And Dominic built out these custom North American Rescue IFACs for every member that showed up, for eight people who came to this training with like top of the line gear. And we trained on each piece of equipment. So we did tourniquets. He actually deployed nasal pharyngeals and used it on somebody there. We videotaped everything. And interestingly enough, as the day went on and as the training progressed, everybody who showed up got more and more involved in it and started asking questions. And it was, for me, it was a scary thing, because here I am trying to monetize something, to build something, and you don't know if people are going to like it or not. I have never done it before. I have no metric to gauge it by. But day 2, we had 24 people. So they went and told their spouses, they told their friends, they brought kids. And day 2 was even more exciting than day 1. And we started to do some incident command and emergency action plans and so on and so forth. It was at that training that I debuted the first assess board. All right, what's the assess board? The assess board is the active shooter evacuation security shield. It's basically a dry erase board. It's a whiteboard that you would see in any classroom, college campus, boardroom, conference room. It looks like a dry erase board. I designed and developed this from the ground up to be bulletproof. So I have a patent pending ballistic dry erase board that's 24 square feet of ballistic protection. It's mobile. And I basically Frankensteined it, the first one together, using spare parts and whatnot. And I debuted it, unbeknownst to anybody, at that first training with Dominic Luke, because he needed a whiteboard. And I'm like, all right, I have this thing. And I brought it over to the house of worship. And then on one of the breaks, I had whoever showed up that day, so it was like 10 adults, I had them wheel the assess board to one end of the ballroom that we were training in. I had them all get behind it, and I just said, walk towards me, about 50 feet. And I videotaped it, and then I told them to stop and come out from different directions. And it was fascinating, because I wanted to see the angles of coverage and whether or not I can secrete people behind it. And they were able to move 10 adults in a line with complete, cover and concealment, 50, like over a totally exposed area. And I couldn't see them. So
for our listeners, can you talk a little bit about like the importance of that concealment? Like, is it, I guess it's technically would be kind of soft cover, but can you just talk a little bit about the concealment and like the importance of it?
Sure. So if you look at the statistics of an active shooter, or shootings in general, it's not limited to active shooter. Most of the time, the shooter doesn't shoot at things that they can't see. So concealment is a one level of security. I won't say it's protection, but it's a security upgrade in your fight against, let's say ballistic threats. Being shot at would be to hide, right? If you look at the national response, be it from the Secret Service, the FBI, Homeland Security, it's run, hide, fight. The first directive is to try to get away, put distance between you and danger. If you can't, hide. But what does hide actually mean, right? If I'm going to hide someplace that I can be found, am I really hidden? You want to hide someplace you're not going to be found, right? Why? Because if you're out of sight, the likelihood that you will be shot at or attacked goes down. It's not eliminated, but it goes down. People don't shoot at what they can't see. The cover component is, even if somebody knows I'm there and they shoot at me, I won't get hit because I'm secreted behind something that can protect me ballistically from the threat being posed towards me. So if I'm being shot at and I'm hiding behind, a concrete wall, I may have cover and concealment, right? Even if somebody knows I'm there, I can still be protected from incoming rounds. So when I designed this board, it had to do both. It had to provide cover and it had to provide concealment. And I designed it based on what had happened in Uvalde. When Uvalde unfolded and we saw those videos, unfortunately, of that tragedy with the officers in the hallway carrying that ballistic shield, children were still alive that probably would have survived had the response been different. I'll leave it at that, right? Because that we can do a whole conversation about that separately. But I had twins, and I'm thinking, I'm a pretty prepared dude, but it's going to take me 20 minutes to get to my kid's school if I was driving like a bat out of hell. So I'm not getting there in time. These events are over in 5 minutes or less for the most part, statistically speaking. Response time for police is 6 to 8 minutes. So there's a gap. There's a space in time where a lot of mayhem can happen. And I just thought the police have this really useful tool for engaging a threat. If I can give my kids similar ballistic protection, I can buy them time at a minimum. Perhaps I can even get them to evacuate and get off the X, right? But at a minimum, I can buy them time. And that's when I bought a mobile dry erase board on Amazon. I took the whole thing apart. I had a buddy who had a welding shop. I asked if I can come by and use scrap metal, and I did that. And I called the ballistic company, and I got some ballistic material. And I literally, like I said, I Frankenstein this. I just put it together haphazard in a way that made sense to me, and then tested it out and tested and prototyped it until we were happy with the design. And that's how the assess board was born. And it got debuted at this first training. So it was the first training and the first assess board came together.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
And so you guys have a product. And I know we talked offline about kind of like the reason why you named your company Fox 2 Sierra. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I think
Absolutely.
That's really interesting.
Okay, so we talked about training, right? So I met. So I have two co-founders. Chris Fettis is one of my co-founders, and Dave Taller is my second co-founder. Both amazing dudes. All three of us bring different things to the table. There's really awesome symbiosis there, and we complement each other really well. F2S, Fox 2 Sierra, came about because my first contact with anybody about making this like legit and turning it into a company was Chris Fettis. We met through a potential training opportunity that didn't take place, but he and I got connected. I was working in the grant space, and I had mentioned about the grants, and it just piqued his interest. And he was like, "Hey, I'm looking to do something like you're describing. Can you educate me more about the grants and how this works and how I can do training?" And the more we talked about it, the more he's like, "You know what? I'm all about it. Let's do this thing.
Make it happen."
So I'm like, all right. Chris Fettis, he's former development group Team 6. super humble dude,
Mm-hmm.
super accomplished dude
Yeah,
by the same
yeah.
token, right? And I'm thinking to myself, look, I'm Izzy Freed, the Jewish lawyer from New York. I'm going to start a security company, and who's going to hire me, right?
Yeah,
Even if
yeah.
I threw out IDF from 30 years ago, all right? Honestly, like, you know, I'm a salesperson. Don't get me wrong. I'm passionate about it. I love it, but I needed credibility, essentially.
Yeah.
Chris was that. Chris brings credibility to the table, right? And we got along peachy keen. So I was trying to think of names for the company, and I'm like, his last name is Fettis, my last name is Freed. So we got two F's. I'm like, all right, two F's. Maybe we'll do security, systems, or something along those lines. Something cheesy. Honestly, it was a cheese ball, idea. But I needed to buy. I needed to incorporate. I needed to buy a domain. So I said, okay, we got two F's and an S. We could do F2S, and I couldn't buy F2S. It wasn't available.
Yeah.
I said, Chris, F2S, the domain's not available. I can't incorporate. And he's like, well, why don't we just go military? Let's do Foxtrot 2 Sierra.
Yeah.
Foxtrot 2 Sierra wasn't available. But I shortened it, and I went Fox 2 Sierra, and that was available. And I think I paid $700 for it on the spot, but because I was afraid I'd lose it. And I bought every iteration of F2S, F2S.org, F2S.this, that, whatever, through a third party, vendor. And I was like, the minute I clicked buy and I had purchased it, I got on the phone with Chris, and I was like, this is real. This is happening. Little did I know that it took a lot longer to get, things rolling and moving along. But Fox 2 Sierra came about because of our last names, and trying to find a domain that jived with our initials.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you guys are really focusing on training, I believe around active shooter training. And is there anything else that you guys are really looking at and saying, hey, this is like where we're headed kind of in the near future? Yeah, even as things happen around the world, as far as like more conflicts, even just more violence in American cities. Is there like a particular vision where you're trying to go?
Excellent question. Complicated question for me to answer. I would say that F2S, Fox 2 Sierra, is ever evolving. The mission, the common mission, is active shooter response. Is securing regular everyday people in their houses of worship, in their schools. Unfortunately, we're seeing a rise in shootings that are school related. It doesn't have to be in the school; it could be outside at sporting events. Activities around the schools. This has turned into a big business, and also a lot of legislation. So it's a big space. It's a very pertinent, relevant issue, and a problem that, from my perspective, seems to be growing as opposed to waning. You look at the state of the world today, and it's different than when I grew up. The threats that my children face today, I never had to face as a child. When my parents sent me off to school, I don't think for 1 second they thought, God forbid, something bad can happen to me in school. Like if I came home with a boo-boo, that was a bad day. Today, you kiss your kid goodbye when you send them off to school. You could be looking at your phone looking for alerts. God forbid, is something happening. Anyway, the point being is, we started out as an active shooter response, right? So training, and that's grown into the assessment. So the company would be broken up basically into two sides of the house. There's the training side and the products and R&D side. So training will be anything. We'll do tactical training for military, law enforcement, and private security. So if you have an established security team, armed or unarmed, that is responsible, SROs, it could be auxiliary police, whatever the case may be, or house of worship, internal security, we will train you up on active shooter response, tactics, marksmanship, room clearing. We have a client that is a very large private nonprofit organization that employs 200 all volunteer security guards in their respective houses of worship and community. We train them. We're responsible for training them annually. That would be the tactical side of the house. And then to a smaller extent, federal law enforcement agencies that need specialized packages for their unique skill sets and whatever it is that they are being deployed to do. Sometimes we get reached out to, can you put a training package for us together? We'll go internally and get our cadre and put a package together for those very specific niche consultations. And then moving away from tactics, in the civilian side of the house, we will do schools, so teachers, staff, admin, even students, if it's called for and it makes sense and the schools are okay with it and the parent body is okay with it, we will train them on active shooter response, emergency action plans, incident command, communication, de-escalation, everything from communication all the way up to self-defense, physical self-defense. That would, and then medical, all the medical. So TCCC, stop the bleed, mass casualty care, combat casualty care under fire. All that is on the training side of the house. Products, we have the assess board, right? That's our flagship product. I'll say it's proprietary. That's the company. It's the company's product. We're pushing that out. I think we have assess boards in 5 states now. So it's exciting. It's by no means everywhere. It's a very hard process, but that board is it has been evaluated and approved by the Department of Homeland Security for the federal funding under that nonprofit security grant. And we have utilized that to put a board in a house of worship.
Wow.
Then we move away from that particular product. We do all types of ballistic work. So we'll do ballistic windows, ballistic doors replacement. So full pull-outs, replacements, frames, doors, whatever you have existing, we'll rip that out and we put in a brand new ballistic rated door or windows. We also do laminates. So we can laminate existing glass. In some circumstances, in other circumstances, we have to replace the glass, but essentially we can laminate it to be privacy glass. Essentially, you can't see in. It could be one-way glass so that you can see one way, but not the other way. We have transitional films, so it's clear, and then you touch a button or it senses an attempt at a breach and it'll turn opaque. We have forced entry and blast resisting laminates, bulletproof laminates, from handgun rounds all the way up to AR-15 rounds, so 5.56, 223 rounds. That would be sort of the target hardening product line that we have. And then I think what brought you and me together was the tech side of things. So we are employing and deploying TAC, the Team Awareness Kit, which is, I'll be completely honest, it's totally new to me. I have no background in it, but one of our cadre and the head of our communications and tech is a TAC guru, and I can say without any hesitation that I believe, I don't want to say definitively, but I believe that we are the first company to deploy TAC in a school setting. So there is a school out there right now that has TAC, has a dedicated server, has several devices, and is able to monitor administration, teachers, and students using TAC and have full situational awareness and communication, dedicated comms. And the reason they got that is because it's a wealthier school with very wealthy student body, parent body, and whatnot. The school also has trips overseas where they take children, kids, students overseas on excursions. And this was a great way for us to stay networked and communicate and have eyes on. It made the parents feel very, very secure and much more at ease when they knew that we had eyes on their kids 24 hours a day. We were able to do all sorts of crazy things, like geofence a hotel that they were staying in. If somebody were to leave the hotel, unannounced, we'd get an alert.
Okay.
So, without getting into too much in the weeds, it's amazing that we were able to do that. And we're now trying to expand on that, bring it to law enforcement, to fire. I know that they're using it in the wildland fires out in the West Coast. So the applications are immeasurable, honestly, and the benefits are tremendous. It is tech, so it's scary for people, especially if they have to be involved in it. It's one thing if you get a camera system, all you have to do is look at a screen like we're doing right now. I'm hands off. I don't need to know anything about it. I just have to click, start, record, stop, whatever the case may be. This is a little bit more involved than that, and that's sort of a scary proposition for some. But once you learn the benefits and the operating system and how it works, it becomes intuitive, like anything else. It's like playing a video game. But the payoff is immeasurable. Our company is built around shaving seconds off response time, and then giving time to those who need the time most. So the protectee is getting time, the responder is cutting down on time. And so everything is time management on our end.
Exactly. That's amazing. Thank you so much. This has been very, very insightful, just to hear like your background and also like the vision for your company and what you've done so far, what you're looking to do. I'm really excited. Like I would love to even just have you be able to come back on the pod and give an update later, but I think this is we just made this connection not too long ago. So, we have opportunities to continue building this relationship. So, thank you so much, Izzy.
Christian, man, thanks goes to you. All right. This was your vision. This was your idea. You presented an opportunity, and I mean, I think you've heard me say it. I look at everything as an opportunity. I don't think we met by chance. I think there's opportunity for us beyond the podcast, and let's keep that momentum going and keep that forward movement. I'm in.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Izzy. And just the whole point of the ShadowBox podcast is to bring on, industry leaders, that are in the world of threat intelligence, like hearing from, their personal experiences, but also, what they're doing to, make the world better. So thank you guys so much. Thank you so much, Izzy, for joining us on this podcast as the first guest. And look forward to the next. All right.
Let's do it, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.